Hello, everyone. Every single part of my body wants to say Happy Motivational Monday, but it is not a Monday. It is a Wednesday. Old habits die hard, but I love Motivational Monday. But I think I might maybe love this a little bit more because we've got the full hour to dive deep into a conversation. So, this is our Connect series. We are in the middle of Leading in Love, and this month we're talking about loving others well. So, how do we navigate our interpersonal relationships? And even before the series was birthed, so many of you were asking for us to start having conversations around how do we navigate conflict, which we'll be doing more about that as we get deeper into this month. How to set boundaries, which is a precursor for navigating conflict. And that's what today's entire conversation is about. So, we're having this conversation because, well, last month we started with self love, right? And you can't really love others well if you don't love yourself well. And there is that quote of you can't love others more than you love yourself. And it's been interesting because I've watched in my life the places where I've loved others more than I loved myself, where like I gave them more than I would ever give myself, or I did for them more than I would ever give myself. But a lot of the times I was overexerting myself, overextending myself, and doing things that people maybe didn't deserve, that people didn't show me that they deserved. So even though I thought I loved people more, it was all coming from a lack of self love because I didn't have my own personal boundaries and I didn't know what I need. And I didn't know how to advocate for that because all I wanted and all I knew was if I have love from someone, I'm safe. And that's not necessarily true either. And I would accept love from everyone. And, I think we go through the phases of our life where relationships change and what we need changes. And sometimes we do it earlier in our lives, sometimes we do it later in our lives. But there does come that moment of, okay, I need a little bit more from people. And even deeper than that, I need a little bit more from myself. So, for those of you who joined our Leading in Love series last month, all about self love, there was about a 92% increase in your own personal self love. So, 92% of you saw an increase in your self love. And, I was having you tell yourself that you love yourself. We were talking about what it means to forgive ourselves. And I think one of the big ones, too, was the conversation of, what's that voice in our mind that's running on autopilot that sometimes we don't even notice that there's a voice saying not nice things to us or not nice things about others. So there's been a lot that we've dove into and it's set the foundation for this conversation here today. So this is our Leading in Love series. This is part 2 of 3. Next month we're talking about professional relationships. So if you're like, I want to learn how to navigate conflict in my professional relationships. I want to learn about how to have conversations setting my boundaries in a professional setting. I want to learn how to do less and be more efficient. All of that will fall in that category too. So I'm dropping that link in the chat for you. If you'd like to register, please do. Also, after this session, so the second Wednesday of every month, we have our Connect series. It's about to be rebranded and it'll be called the Deep Dive. So it's our deep dive. Motivational Monday is our niche, subtopics of the main topic, and then the deep dive is where we take a full hour and we dive deep into the topic. And then we also, the third Wednesday of the month is the deep dive mentorship. So that's where we take what we learn in this session and everything throughout the month and we bring it into reality and actually mentor you and coach you and guide you. Your face is able to be seen, your voice is able to be heard, and we strongly suggest that you are an active participant in the conversation because um, it's one of those where we have less people that attend that session, and that's how it'll always be because it's the session that requires the most of you. It does require you to get vulnerable. It is made for those who are willing and very ready to start doing the work in this area of their life and start taking some action. And for some of us, we just like absorbing information, and that's where all these other sessions come in. But that one is taking action, that one is putting into work everything that you're hoping to see for yourself, right? And the places where you're like, okay, I may not be as strong as I want to be in this place. And I really would love to grow in this area because this matters to me. And it's where we start getting into the conversation of like, what's your value system? What matters to you? How do you want to walk throughout the life? How would you like to see your life starting to shift? So I dropped that link in the chat as well. For those of you who might be interested, it'll be me and April again. So it'll be completely curated based on this conversation. We'll have a worksheet, we'll do the conversation, we'll get real. We've had people crying in the sessions. We've had some people say that it seems like group therapy in a really good way. Um, and we're not therapy, we're not doing anything clinical, but we are giving you a space to be seen and to be heard and to be vulnerable and to be accepted in the messiness that is human existence, and knowing that we all have places to grow. And even though April and I sit up here and we have our podcast and we talk and we share and we know so many things, we're still just figuring it out too. We may seem like we have it a little bit more put together, but like, you don't know if I'm wearing pajama pants right now or on a Zoom screen. Am I wearing pajama pants right now? No, but I could be. So, with all of that, I'm going to drop one more link in the chat for you. This is all of our life guides links. So, anything life guides, you can go to this link. You can't press the link, but you can copy and paste it. I don't know why it does that, but that's where you'll find everything life guides, all of our recordings, all of our sessions, everything along those lines. So, before I intro April, I'm curious, and one of our guides, Edith, was the one who brought this to the table for me. She asked the question, what's your purpose for being here today? What's motivating you for being here, being on this session, learning about boundaries, choosing to show up, choosing to take time out of your Wednesday to be here on this session? Because, for you, it might be I'm in the middle of struggling in some of my relationships, or it might be, wow, I've never thought of this ever, and I think this is a great place to start. Or it might be, I've been setting boundaries for a while and I just want to get better. Or you're like, I just love what Life Guides does, and I just want to be here and learn regardless of anything. So let us know in the chat why you're here. The more feedback that we have in the chat, and the more that you provide us that energy, the more that we'll feed off of you, and the more that we will provide that energy back to you. So without further ado, while you're writing your beautiful novels about why you're here, because I know all of you are just like so excited about that question, I'm gonna intro the beautiful, the wonderful April. So, April is a certified life guide and relationship coach with over 11 years of experience helping individuals and small businesses achieve their most meaningful goals. Her work is deeply informed by her personal journey as a 3-time divorcee and navigating life's transitions with courage and resilience. A best-selling author, speaker, podcast host, and workshop leader, April engages audiences with her relatable storytelling, warmth, and authenticity. So April is one of our guides. We have 2 layers that you can connect with life guides. One is on our events where you get these group sessions and you get to get all of the insight and all of the wisdom, maybe without the intimidation and vulnerability of a one-on-one call. But the one-on-one calls with our guides are going to be the places where you get the most growth and you get the most out of it. You're about 65% likely to achieve your goals if you just set them and do them yourself. You're about 90% likely to achieve your goals if you have someone helping you achieve them. So that's the magic of having a guide. I'm going to drop I'm going to drop April's profile in the chat for you. You can schedule a call with her and have her help you along your journey. And I'll also share it at the end because maybe you need some time to build a relationship with her. Maybe you need to get to know her. So before we fully dive in, April, do you have anything to say to kind of start us off and introduce yourself?
Yeah, so I'm very excited to be here. Thanks for having me, Kira. One of the things that I want to share about this conversation is that it may make you feel a little uneasy if you have either grown up with a lot of boundaries or with no boundaries and you're kind of unsure what they are, but that's okay. And so, my goal today is to help bring some clarity to boundaries so that you guys can just live a healthier, happier life by setting good boundaries.
Beautiful. And that follows along wonderfully with why you all are here. Some of you are looking for wonderful knowledge and you're dancing about it. Some of you are familiar with boundaries and want to get better. You really enjoyed life guides. Some of you have a hard time saying no and or sticking to your no's. Um, Learning new ways to love is important. We've got some people here who are just here for the wisdom snacks. Some people are here for energy, and then also crossing boundaries. Oh, a lot in my relationship, but I don't think I do. And then again, I might do. And when it comes to my daughter, I tend to cross a lot of them. Great. We're going to dive into a decent amount of this. And I think, Kalina, that's a great thing to keep into perspective as we're having this conversation is how can you have and honor your own boundaries? How can you have and honor others' boundaries? Because we might be very strong in one area and we might be very weak in another area. And that's such a great place of awareness. So, April, let's just dive right in and start having the conversation. What are boundaries? And maybe the easier way to start with it is what aren't boundaries?
Yeah, that is a great question. So I want everyone to take a moment. And when we say the word boundaries, what comes to mind? Is it a fortified castle? Is it this fence? Is it a wall that no one can climb? So anytime I talk about boundaries, I want to understand like what people think about them. Because in many cases, when we hear the word boundaries, we hear restrictions, we hear no, we hear tough love, we hear all these different things. But boundaries aren't walls, they're not castles, they're not harsh ultimatums. Boundaries really are guardrails. So that's the way I like to think about it. They are the ways that you communicate to people that keep you safe, that keep them safe, but they're like those guardrails on the winding road, right? To make sure you don't go too far off one side or too far off the other. I like to say it like this. Boundaries teach people how to treat you, but they also teach you how to treat you. In many cases, we talk about boundaries from a place of other people, right? Like, I'm going to set this boundary in my relationship or with my children or with my spouse, but we don't think about the boundaries that we set with ourselves. So they go both ways. And so, one of the things I want to emphasize about boundaries is what is the cost of saying yes too often, right? So, think about those times when you said yes when you really should have said no. When you say yes too often, the first thing that happens is that you lose your self respect. This opens you up for manipulation, it opens you up for people to take advantage of you. And so when you say no when you're supposed to, it's telling yourself, it's telling the world that your time, your energy, and your voice matters. So the second thing that happens when we say yes too often is burnout. How many of you guys can relate to that, right? Whether it's burnout on your job, in your relationship, in your home. Every time we say yes to something we're not supposed to, we're saying no to the good things in our life. And so when we are experiencing burnout, we don't get the rest, we don't get the meditation, we don't get the things that we need to live a healthy life. So think about it this way, when you are saying no to the things you're supposed to, you get the rest you deserve for a sustainable life, right? Sometimes we think about rest, even if it's just mental rest, not even physical rest, we think about it as it's a reward, right? I worked hard all day. I get to take a nap. I'm a napper, y'all. Or, I worked hard all week. I get to rest on the weekend. But really, it's not a reward. It's a requirement for us to have a healthy life. And then lastly, the thing that happens when we say yes too often is we have a poor mental health, we have poor physical health. So I read this quote from the National Alliance on Mental Wellness. It said that women who regularly enforce personal boundaries experience 40% lower levels of anxiety and stress. So think about that. Just saying no more often, less anxiety, less stress. Yes, please. Right. So when we say no to the things we're supposed to, it allows us to live a healthier life.
And I think that's really the one thing that the end of that all brought up for me is drop 222 in the chat if stress and anxiety are kind of like a normal part of your life. Unfortunately, we live in a society where it's normalized, but stress and anxiety are useful in small doses. Stress and anxiety is really meant for like survival. And if we were like wild creatures living out, it tells us that there's something wrong. But unfortunately, we live in a society that has normalized stress and anxiety so much. And that's why these conversations are so important because we I'm so upset. I'm personally upset by this. I have a friend who's in an unfortunate relationship and there's so much stress and anxiety in it. And it's not a bad I specifically didn't say bad relationship because it's not bad, but I'm like, "Babe, you could have a better relationship with someone who actually respects themselves, so then they'll respect you." Because like the problem, yeah, they don't respect you and whatever, they don't respect themselves. And it all starts from within. But all my friend knows is stress and anxiety in his family relationships, in his work relationships. So of course, in his actual relationship, he's now accepting stress and anxiety. So I think that's something to also be aware of too, is like, where do you not have the boundaries around your own energy of I should enjoy my life, I should enjoy the people that I am around, the people I work with, the people I love, my friends, my family. Obviously, we can't like idealize it too much and be like, all I want to do is enjoy everything because life is real. We know life is real. But it can also be really real that some of you might be accepting stress and anxiety in places where you shouldn't. And that's how change starts to get made, is when we start to see, okay, I want to do things a little bit differently. Yeah, my family was stressed out my whole entire life, but now I want to be the one to break that pattern. And boundaries, just like April said, are important for being able to choose who you become in this lifetime, because they say that you are a byproduct of the 5 people that you surround yourself most with. But if you don't have boundaries around who these 5 people are, or the way that they show up in your life, or what you need from them, then you might not become the best version of yourself based on the lack of boundaries that you have set. And for me, I don't necessarily say boundaries all the time when I'm having conversations with people. I'll say, like, this is my standard. This is what I need. It's not personal. This is just what I need as a Kira to live a happy and fulfilled life. And you don't have to give that to me. So if that's something that you don't have the availability and the space for, that's perfectly fine. But for me, as a Kira, that's my requirement. So maybe we just don't continue on from here, depending on where you're at and what you're able to give me. And it gives you a sense of empowerment. I think the more that I started honoring my vulnerability and the more that I started honoring my boundaries, the more that I started to understand myself. I started to understand my strengths and I started to understand my weaknesses, and I started being able to communicate them with so much more ease. And yeah, exactly. Realistic expectations. What are the realistic expectations in a world that doesn't really set those? So being being full of standards. You know, when have any of you have you ever met someone or maybe been to a hotel or a restaurant or a business, and you see, like, it's a person or a business or whatever, you see that it's running so efficiently, and you see that everyone knows what they have to do and where they have to be, and they're doing it and they look good doing it? That's what your life can look like if you have boundaries. When you're boundaryless, like, imagine if you're at the ocean, you know, on a normal day that the boundary is where the water meets the sand and then the water goes back and the water meets the sand and the water goes back. They know where they're supposed to be, right? But then imagine if there's like a hurricane and all of a sudden that boundary, there's chaos. Everything is everywhere. Some of you might be living in a hurricane at all times. That's supposed to be few and far between. And there's supposed to be that space of like, this is where the sand starts, and this is where the water starts, and this is where we meet. So, with that, I know that you have your own formula, April, regarding clarifying boundaries, setting boundaries that are clear, that help people understand what you need, and maybe help others see it might be helpful if I set boundaries. So, take us on a clarifying boundaries journey.
Yeah, I'm looking in the chat and I'm seeing all these twos and a lot of twos for some of you guys. So you definitely can resonate with what we're talking about, the level of stress and anxiety that comes with um, kind of being a doormat for people, right? Kind of just doing everything that people have asked you to do without regard to your own peace and your own safety. And so there's really three things that I talk about when it comes to boundaries. The first one is we have to get clear. We have to ask ourselves and get honest with ourselves about what's not working. So, in the intro, Kira read some of my bio, and one of the things that she mentions was that I've been divorced 3 times. And one of the reasons why I was in these unhealthy relationships, because I was never clear about what wasn't working in my life. So, it starts with understanding what's not working. We talk about dysfunction, right? Dysfunction in and of itself is not bad. It becomes bad when it becomes common. It's like the check engine light, right? It's that little light that your car is saying, hey, you need to pay attention to something. So clarifying our boundaries is kind of the same thing. It's that check engine light. It's that voice in the back of your head that's saying something isn't right. And I'll give you a couple examples that, you guys might be relate to. If you can, drop it in the chat. So the first one is maybe you want to feel peace in your home, but you keep allowing interruptions, unannounced visits, unannounced phone calls. So all of those things are draining your peace. Maybe you want to be more financially stable, but you keep allowing family or friends to borrow money without limits, right? These are examples of how we've let our boundaries slip. So the first thing is that we have to get clear on what that boundary is. So, what is it that I'm feeling? What's happening? And what is the consequences of that? And then the second thing that I encourage people to do is I want you guys to write your boundaries down. Now, how many of you guys have gone to the grocery store or to Target and you didn't have a list and you got everything but what was supposed to be on your list, right? This is what happens when we don't write down our boundaries. So we try to set a boundary with a person, and we may communicate everything but the actual boundary. So writing it down, whether that's in your phone or in your journal, so that you are very clear, because the next thing you're going to want to do is to communicate it. And we'll talk about that soon. But what does this do? It builds accountability with yourself. It builds accountability with your accountability partners, which we'll talk about a little bit later, and it activates your voice. So the first thing we have to do is we have to start with getting clear on what our healthy boundaries are.
It makes me think about also thinking, okay, this is how I think about life in general. Is like the idea of something is so much easier than the actual like lived experience of something. So as you're writing out these boundaries and as we move on from this conversation and step into the mentoring call next week, I also want you, as you're writing those out, maybe write the places where it would be the easiest for you to say no and the easiest for you to set boundaries, because some of you might get on a boundary high and like want to set all of these boundaries, but really using your voice to say no to someone is hard if you've never done it before. Using my voice to say no to someone, as someone who's been working on my boundaries for literal years, still is hard. With certain people, very easy. With other people, very hard. So I want you to also write that down, because I think that might be a really great place for you to look at, okay, what are the relationships in my life that I have that flexibility and that I just haven't used that muscle, and or start talking to your people and be like, "Can I just practice boundaries on you? I just want to practice. I've never done it before. I need some help, and maybe you'll teach them too." But that's the biggest thing, is really learning how to be vulnerable. And I think when we start talking about boundaries, it's a place of really being vulnerable and letting your guards down, even that you have with yourself, your own self-imposed guards that you have towards yourself, of like, oh, I can do everything. I can take care of everything. I can be the best at everything. But really, what are you sacrificing for that? Because every action has a reaction. Every choice has an unchoice. And when you see yourself for what you really are, which is a human, right? You are a human. You are one single human. You only have 24 hours in a day. You have limited energy. All of this is fact. Whether or not you choose to accept it as fact, very different story. But all of this is fact. So when we start to get into the conversations of how do we how do we set boundaries? It starts with you seeing yourself, but then also there's the conversation of how do we set boundaries in a way that feels good for other people? Because you could say no, kind of like a jerk, and get the result that you want, more of your energy, but you might create more tension in your relationship that ends up draining more energy because now you're ruminating on it because you're like, oh, I could have done that differently, or why did I say it that way? So vulnerability is such a great tool of being, and this is how I set boundaries, and this is how I'm vulnerable with people. I tell people, hey, I have been working on my boundaries and I've been working on my vulnerability, and it's not easy for me, but it's really important, and it's something that I've never had, and it's something that I've never been shown. So I'm looking at my life and I'm looking at the places where I might need to start saying no, or where I may have previously done too much. And I know that might be really uncomfortable for some people as I'm starting to change. But I wanted to let you know that that I'm shifting, and I'm becoming a different person. I'm putting in this work, and it's really uncomfortable. And all of the boundaries I'm setting, they're for me personally, and they're my standards for my life. And they're not anything personal about you. It doesn't matter if it's you or the turtle across the street or my next door neighbor. I'm going to have the same standards, but it's going to be really different in our relationship because I've never done this with you before. So I just want you to know that I love you and I appreciate you. And I'm doing this weird, hard work. And I'm sorry for if it creates some tension or if it makes you feel a certain type of way. I'm open to talking about it. I'm open to having conversations, and my way isn't the right way. I just know that I need to start shifting some things up. And that's such a different conversation than, no, I'm not doing that anymore. You take way too much of my energy. Very different. You'll get two very different results. Both of those are technically boundaries, but I feel like sometimes we get into this like warrior protector, I need to protect myself mode. And sometimes your vulnerability is your greatest protector. And also, one thing I'll say is that there are also people out there who will never respect your boundaries. There are people out there who will never see outside of themselves in their world and the way that they impact others. There are people in your life who you won't be able to set a boundary with, and maybe that looks like starting to remove that relationship in your life. I did that last year. I went through a relationship revolution. I had a conversation with every person in my life, but there was one person that I didn't have a deep conversation with. I had a very surface level, hey, I'm shifting, this is what I need, and she was like, I can't meet your need. But I was never going to be able to be like, hey, this is the way you hurt me, this is how it feels, this is what I would want differently, because she didn't have that capacity, and I just knew it was time to come to an end too. So that's also real. Not everyone will be able to hear you, and that's fine. It's not about them, it's about you. So teach us, April, a little bit more about how to communicate those boundaries, based on the work that you've done, and the formulas that you have that might help people dive a little bit deeper.
I love what you said about the warrior mentality. Once again, based upon how we were raised to think about boundaries, a lot of times we approach it from that space of, I'm just going to tell you what I'm thinking and you have to accept it, versus from a place of love and being vulnerable. So I grew up in the 70s and 80s. I know I'm dating myself. And so I grew up in this generation where you were seen but not heard. And many of you might be able to relate to that. And so we never really were given the freedom to communicate boundaries to other people or to communicate standards. And so the second thing we have to learn is how to do that. And it may be uncomfortable, it may be unfamiliar, especially if you didn't grow up in a community or in household where you were free to say things like that hurts me or that makes me feel a certain way. So now, as adults, we've got to learn the skill of how to communicate our boundaries. So one of the things I want you to remember, that a boundary that lives inside of your mind does not protect you. So as long as it's only in your head, that person will never understand what that boundary is. Sometimes when I'm coaching couples and they're having issues with communication, one of the partners will say, well, I don't like it when my spouse does this. And I ask them, okay, well, have you communicated that? And they'll say, well, I get upset every time they do it, but have you communicated it? And this is why we write our boundaries down so that we can say exactly what it is, right? So we can't expect people to honor things that we haven't expressed. We can't expect people to honor the boundaries that we haven't shared with them. So there's three ways to communicate our boundaries. The first one is to be clear. So this is to say exactly what the boundary is using those statements that Kira put in the chat before. So what am I feeling? What's happening? And what are the consequences of that? And this is something that you may have to sit with so that you can get really clear on what that is. The second thing is that we want to communicate it in a calm way. Anyone who's ever been yelled at, you know what happens, right? That person starts yelling, it starts to sound like wonk, 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 and you just like, you blank out, right? And so I advise people to wait until you're in a calm environment so that you can communicate your boundary clearly, right? So not yelling, not with the burst of emotion. And then the last one, which we're going to dig into a little bit deeper, is to be consistent. This is where we get tripped up with our boundaries, is that we have to be prepared to follow through. So I think about boundaries with children. I have a daughter who's 17 years old. Someone else in the chat said they have a toddler, they have teens, so I get it, right? But what you have to think about is when you are setting boundaries with someone, especially your children, you are keeping them safe, right? So when our kids are little, we tell them things like, don't touch the stove, it'll hurt you. And then when our kids are older, we may have to tell them things, you have a curfew so you don't get hurt, right? So that makes it a little bit easier when we're communicating our boundaries, when we're asking ourselves, where's this boundary coming from? Is it coming from a place of resentment? Is it coming from a place of anger? Or is it coming from a place of love and protection? And that makes it easier when you communicate boundaries. When you're trying to communicate with your spouse, ask yourself, is this boundary out of anger? Or is it because I want to protect our marriage or I want to protect our relationship? Same thing with friends, right? Where's the boundary coming from? And that makes it so much easier to communicate it when we do it clearly, when we do it calmly, and when we do it consistently.
So beautiful. And I think it's so important. Oh, I'm gonna drop it in the chat, those three steps so that you all have that as well. Clear, calm, and consistent. Um, there are some people in your life where I practice my boundaries the most through dating. Um, I'm single, I'm moving to a different country in less than a year. So with that, that means I get to date, I get to explore. It means that I still have to wait to find my person, whatever. But it means that I get a lot of exposures, right? And I kept being in this place of being like, I am struggling to express my boundaries. Also, my core wound is boundaries and expression to men because of just daddy issues, right? So I know I'm like, cool, I'm the type of person where I can intake all of this information, but I also have to actively put in the work in my life to make it happen. And I kept coming across these men who didn't really match my expectations and where I wouldn't honor my previous boundaries that I had set because, again, the idea of something is very different than the lived experience of something. But it's true when April is saying, write down your boundaries because I finally, and I'll show you, I wrote out a list of the qualities that are like a standard bare minimum for men in my life. And now is one man who matches those. And I'm like, "Oh, all I needed to do, I've spent years struggling. All I had to do was sit down and write it out, but also I didn't just sit down and write it out. I look at it regularly and I'm like, okay, does this person, because things change as you get to know someone more too. I'm like, does this person still abide by all of these things? Um, I'm trying to make sure that it's all PG-13 and we're all good on here. But like I have all of these boundaries and all of the muscles. He's got muscles and he's great, but all of the muscles are qualities that he has. And if it was different, if I was dating a man that didn't match these qualities and I was looking at this list and most of it was empty and didn't have an emoji next to it, I'd be like, cool. he doesn't live up to my standards and this is not the type of relationship that I want in my life, I'm going to step aside. So it allows us when we're in these emotional situations, because relationships are very emotional. It is all heart. It's pure heart, a little bit of brain. It allows us to go back to our rational selves because our emotions can be pretty erratic, pretty chaotic. It allows us to get back to our rational selves and be like, okay, when I'm actually grounded, when I'm actually focused, when I actually know what I want, when I'm centered in Kira or Tiffany or Ty or Gabrielle, when I'm centered in who I am, this is what I know that I need outside of anyone's influence. And when you have it written down, it brings you back to that place, even if you're in the midst of chaos and you're like, oh my God, I'm going through a hard thing. What is my boundary? What do I have to set? Once your mind is in a fight or flight state, which it will be once you're in conflict, most of the time, then it makes it easier once you have these tools already set for you. And once you already have your grounded foundations already set for you, because then you don't have to think about it anymore. It already exists. You've already done the work and you've already put into place and into practice the places where you can say, this is exactly what I want. And actually, April, I know we're going to talk about, maybe this follows into championing our boundaries, but I think one of the things I want to hear from for you is what happens if we're too rigid with our boundaries? What happens if someone is like almost meeting our expectations and maybe they just need a little bit more time, or where we're kind of just like way too intense about them and don't take a chill pill, you know?
Yeah, that goes back to, our boundaries are not these castles, right? Now, here's the thing, you might have to be very rigid with some boundaries. Okay. I share a lot that I've had three failed marriages. So when it comes to dating, I am extremely rigid with those boundaries because I know the outcome of allowing people to, make me think a certain way or feel a certain way that isn't real. I know the consequences of toxic relationships. So in that area, I am extremely rigid because literally my life, my physical, my mental, emotion, my financial life depends on it. Okay. And if you've gone through a divorce, you know what I'm talking about. Some boundaries do need to be rigid when it comes to maybe our children. If our children have certain friends or certain activities, once again, this could be life endangering, right? But some of those boundaries with, let's say, finances may not be as rigid, right? We make a budget, maybe we overspend a little bit, but then we go back to our budget. So it really depends on where that boundary lives in your life. It depends on how important, it depends on the consequences of that boundary. So you're right. Some are going to have to be rigid. When I work with people previously who may have been recovering from an addiction, right? Your boundaries have to be so solid so that you don't go back to that pattern. And so it really depends on what that boundary is and what kind of the worth. I don't want to say the worth of the boundary, but what the consequences are. If it's as simple as, well, my daughter won't talk to me for a day, you're right. But if it's something like this could pull me back into a lifestyle that could jeopardize myself and my family, you have to be very rigid. Yeah.
Hmm. So beautiful. Yeah, I think that's really important, understanding the difference, because there are the places where like, cool, if I don't go to bed by 9:30 tonight, I'll
Yeah.
be fine tomorrow. I just won't go to the gym.
Yeah.
Versus if I'm texting and driving, I could endanger myself and other people and have to live with those consequences for the rest of my life. Very different situations, but those are both boundaries. So, I think before we start talking about championing our boundaries, blah 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 blah. The only reason, and I say this with the utmost truth in the world, the only reason why I am able to be sitting here having a conversation about boundaries in a way where it's very clear that I've done the work on the boundaries is because I had support. Setting boundaries, drop 333 in the chat if you have never really, if you're like in this conversation right now and you're realizing I've never really set a good, healthy, solid boundary. I didn't either. And the only way now that I've been able to is because I've had support on my journey. Um, Again, the mental of things is very different than the lived experience of things, right? So I understood in the beginning of my journey, I understood that boundaries need to be set. I understood that I was overextending myself. I understood that I didn't have any foundations or protections for myself at all. I was just so flexible. I was just whatever people wanted me to be. I was never what I needed to be. And as I started realizing, oh my God, I need to be vulnerable and oh, I have to set boundaries. The idea of it was really cool. I was like, oh, I can do that. Definitely. I need that in my life. But when the moment came and I was like, that person crossed a boundary, or I never set a boundary on that, and I do not like when that happens in my life. Um, it would have me shaking in my boots. I would be terrified to set the boundary because I didn't know how. And I had a mentor that I could call and I'd be like, "Hi, you and I have been working on this for 2 years, but now I'm in it and I need some help. This is what I want to say." And they'd be like, "Kira, you're saying way too much. You're not clear, and you're basically apologizing for honoring your own needs. We're going to need to fix that." And we'd workshop it together, and then I would go ahead and set the boundary and it would go over so much better. So this is relationships are messy, communication can be messy, conversations can be messy, and having support on your journey is so freaking important. Whether it's a mentor or a friend, obviously the biggest plug is going to be Life Guides. This is a free benefit that you have through your employer where you can use us unlimited for as many sessions on as many topics with as many guides as you need. So, when I was in a very interesting relationship dynamic last summer, I had a guide specifically for that relationship and I'd be like, "Girl, I need help." And she helped me weekly really learn how to navigate that relationship, how to communicate. It was a very different relationship dynamic than I've ever been used to. I would have blown that relationship into a catastrophic disaster alone. I just didn't have the tools and the skill set. So whatever support systems you have, they get to be your time capsule and they get to be your grounding factor in something that you don't feel grounded and solid for. So the the support on your boundary journey is a real. And then outside of that, outside of having someone help support us, April, how do we begin championing our boundaries? And exactly what Tiffany says, she's never stuck to her boundaries. She's set and broken them. How do we not do that anymore? And then, like Tiffany said again, how do we be unapologetically firm in the love that we need to give ourselves by setting these boundaries?
Yeah. This is where most of us get tripped up, right? So we've got this boundary, we're clear on what it is. We may have communicated the boundary, but it's following through. And so following through, which I call championing your boundaries, being a champion for yourself. And I picked that word because so many times we want other people to do it for us. I'm going to be honest with you, especially if we are not used to this level of communication, right? And so we have to be our own champions. And here's the thing, when we do that, it probably will be uncomfortable, especially in the beginning. Others might get upset with you, and that's okay. They are entitled to their emotions, and you may even feel guilty. And so, here's some ways before we talk about how, here's some ways that that I'm kind of wavering on my boundaries. So, if you're feeling drained or resentful, right? We all know that feeling, whether it's with a supervisor, with a person we work with someone in our family, with our spouse. When they do that thing and it's constantly just draining you, or you're constantly feeling that little tinge of resentfulness towards them. Okay. When we find ourselves saying things like, it's fine, how many people are guilty of that, right? So
Mm.
someone is violating a boundary, and what do we say? They go, "What's wrong?" And we go, "It's fine, nothing," right? So one of my favorite memes is there's this dog in a cubicle, and the building is burning down around him, and he's like, "It's fine. Life is good. It's fine." And that's how sometimes we react when our boundaries are being violated. How many of you guys have ever felt guilty for saying no? So a couple of you guys put that in the chat, right? When we say no and we get that feeling of, oh, I had to tell someone no, but that goes back to why do we have the boundary, right? That boundary is to keep us safe. That boundary is to keep them safe. And so when we look at boundaries from that perspective, it takes away some of that guilt of telling someone no. Once again, like you have to think about the consequences. Like Kara said, I love my sleep, y'all. Like when I say love my sleep, and my friends know, don't call me during my nap time. My phone is off when I sleep at night. Like they know. And I don't feel bad about that because what happens is when I violate that boundary and I stay up too late or I don't get my naps, I am just not a happy person. Okay. And then lastly, anytime you're being asked to betray your values and your beliefs, that is when you know that boundary is not being honored. So what do we do? Right? What do we do with the boundaries that people aren't paying attention to, they're not respecting? So there's really four things. The first one is prepare for resistance. Everyone is not going to like your no, and that's just it. But everyone has the right to say no, and you have the right to say no, especially if it's protecting you. Look, boundaries are one of those things that once you get to doing them are one of the easiest ways to protect yourself. Okay. Most people are not going to respect your boundary if they're benefiting from your lack of action. So if it's the person on the other end, they may guilt trip you, they may push back, they may have emotional reactions. I like to think of it this way: they throw those adult tantrums, right? So they're gonna push back. So preparing for resistance, that's when we go back to writing down our boundary. So that's very clear. Hey, this is my boundary. I'm not wavering from it. I'm not guessing at it, right? This is it. The second thing is we need to limit over explaining, right? No is a complete sentence. Say it with me. No.
No.
See, you can do it. You don't owe anyone a lengthy explanation. Now, if it's your spouse, your child, your boss, you can give an explanation. But what happens is when we start to over explain, then their rebuttals make us second guess our boundaries. Well, it's really not that serious and it's really not that bad, right? So, those are things we start to tell ourselves when we over explain. So, at the end of the day, once again, if your boundary is clear, it's written down, this is my boundary and this is what I'm doing. Like Kira said, the next thing is ask for support. You know, I shared with you guys, I didn't grow up in a household or a community where standing up for your emotions or your mental health or your physical well being was something that was encouraged or even tolerated. And so, like Kira, as I was going through, particularly the healing journey after my last divorce, one of the things that I specifically needed help with was setting those boundaries. And so, like Kira, I have that list now when I date. And I not only have a list, but I have a group of friends. So as an entrepreneur, I have a group of community business owners. And as a single person, I have a group of friends that either if I'm making a business decision and I've set a boundary, that business group can say, hey, wait a minute, you said this is not what you want to do. Why are you doing this? And then I have that group of trusted friends that if I'm dating, they can say, hold on a minute. I'm starting to see this behavior in you, or you said you didn't want this, but now I see you're allowing this. So ask for support and get support from people that you will allow to tell you no. Right? So that might be your best friend, that might be your mom, that might be a life coach, that may be life guides, that may be a spiritual advisor, whatever it looks like for someone to have your back, but also that person that's going to give you the tough love because you don't want someone that's going to allow you to violate your boundaries. And then lastly, and this is the one that I feel like kind of gets us the most, is allow yourself to grieve, right? Boundaries can bring loss. They may bring loss of relationships. They may bring loss of finances. When you're single and you don't want to date the wrong person, you may feel lonely. It comes with a level of loss. And it's okay to acknowledge, man, enforcing this boundary sucks. It really does, right? When I have to tell my teenager no on something and I'm not going to talk to you, that's okay, but you're going to be alive tomorrow. So you can be mad at me, that's okay. Or like you said, like Kira said, you may have to end some friendships, but whatever it is, allow yourself to grieve the loss of whatever comes with setting that boundary, because I guarantee you're going to be happier on the other side of that. But that's also where getting the right help, because you might need someone to help you through that grief so you don't go back to the same behavior. You don't go back to the same unsafe situation. So, the four things again: prepare for resistance. So, already have a plan for the pushback. Limit your over explaining, right? Make it simple, make it clear, make it respectful. Ask for support, get the help you need to set the boundaries and communicate them, and then allow yourself to grieve whatever may be lost as you're setting your boundaries.
Hmm. Championing our boundaries. We're going to start setting boundaries and we're going to start honoring our boundaries. So this is the part where we come to Q&A. You can drop your questions in the chat or you can drop your questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. And this is where we help you get a little bit more. If there are things that we kind of touched upon on this conversation, but you'd like us to dive a little bit deeper, or if you have a specific scenario that you're going through, we can help you and we can answer your questions. So we always want to make time for the Q&A because this is a lot of information and we want to make sure that by the end of this that you leave feeling like, okay, I've got a good roadmap. I know where I want to go. I know what I want to do. I might not do it perfectly, but at least we have an idea, right? And as I wait for some of those questions to come in, one of the things that I wanted to say as well is, and you mentioned this a little bit, I was thinking about this morning, and I've been thinking about this a lot, maybe over the past year, that I've been like really clear on the standards of those in my life, is I refuse to sacrifice my own comfortability to make someone else comfortable. And when I'm a people pleaser, or when I don't set my boundaries, or when I don't advocate for my needs, I do that usually because I don't want to make someone uncomfortable and I don't want to tell them no, and I don't want them to feel the repercussions of what my choices and my needs would make them feel. But the thing is if you're choosing to be in my life and if you're choosing to have access to me, then yeah, there are going to be certain standards and certain obligations and certain boundaries, and it just is what it is. And also the same thing, if I was talking to my best friend, I wouldn't want my best friend to not say what they need to say because they thought that it wasn't going to rest well with me and then they ended up not getting what they needed. Like I would never want that for them. So I have to remember that for myself, and I have to remember that for myself all of the time. And even there, I was thinking about it this morning because there's a little teeny tiny thing that happened. Not a big thing. It could be a big thing, but I didn't want to ask the question that would let me know, like, is this a big thing or is this a little thing? Because I didn't want to make them uncomfortable and also me uncomfortable too. Asking the questions sometimes is hard. And I had to remind myself, like, I refuse to sacrifice my comfortability to make someone else comfortable. And then I get to choose. Then once I have that answer, then I get to be like, cool, yeah, they absolutely do deserve to continue having space in my life. Or we need to have a deeper conversation because if there's an answer that could potentially be what I think it is, I don't want that in my life. And that doesn't mean I'm gonna cut this person out immediately, but it does mean like we're gonna have to sit down and I'm gonna have to get vulnerable and I'm gonna have to share, like, regardless if it's you or someone else, I do not accept this in my life. So you can either ship up or shape out, or shape up or ship out, whatever, you know? So I wanted to express that because that's really important as well. So we have a question, April. How do you deal with people that habitually step across the line of your boundary?
Yeah. So it's really going back to the three steps and I think I kind of closed it, Kira, but I saw it in there. It goes back to the three steps we talked about. First of all, make sure you're very clear on what that boundary is. And then ask yourself too, where's the boundary coming from? So once again, is it a true boundary? Are you just frustrated? But get clear, write it down. Two, make sure you're communicating it very clearly so that this person doesn't have any space to say, well, I didn't know, or I didn't understand what you mean, or, I didn't know what you meant by that. But get very clear on what the boundary is. And then lastly, this is where we have to stick to our guns. This is where we have to make sure that we are enforcing whatever consequences come with that boundary. And typically, if you do those three things, that person will understand. They'll get the hint, right? Now, if we're, and once again, I don't know the situation. So if we're talking about something that is now jeopardizing your safety, that's a whole different conversation, right? But if we're just talking about someone who is violating a boundary at work or at home, it's doing those three things, but it's the last one. It's sticking to the consequences of their actions. And here's what I've learned, guys. This is an area that tripped me up in dating. I didn't allow people to suffer the consequences of their actions. I would always cover for them, or, oh, it doesn't take all that, or it's not that bad, or when I do this, it hurts their feelings. But here's the thing, this is how people learn, it's through consequences. Okay. And so it is okay to tell someone, if you do this, I'm going to do this, and you do it. Once again, where it gets hard is that it may hurt us. But in order for us to enforce those boundaries the way we need to for our safety, then we do have to stick to them.
One thing that popped into my mind too is, where are you living in a fantasy about these people? Where do you think that they're so much more than they actually are? And this is something that I had to learn specifically through dating. If you look at my astrological chart, if you look at anything, any chart, anything, my whole entire life purpose is to learn through relationships. So a lot of my examples will always come from friends, family, lovers, whatever. But I started realizing a pattern. I had narcissistic, angry men in my life, and I was like, okay, I'm done with that. And then another narcissistic, angry man came into my life, and I was like, am I an angry person? And I had to realize, like, through a lot of contemplation, it's not me. Like, I get angry to protect myself where I've had no boundaries. And if I had boundaries, I wouldn't have to be angry and turn into a fire-breathing dragon to try to protect myself. Because really, if I'm getting to that point, this person shouldn't be in my life. And I learned through one of my mentors, when you're setting a boundary, and April said this, be calm, right? Low toned, low tone. The lower a tone and the slower you talk, the easier it will be for someone to receive your boundary. But beyond that, don't say your boundary more than twice. You let someone know once, this is my boundary. If someone crosses it again, this is my boundary, and I'm sorry you're showing that this is a pattern, and I can't have this in my life. Um, I think there's a difference between someone consistently breaking a boundary versus like you setting a boundary and someone changes, and then maybe like 6 months down the road they break the boundary again, but maybe it's different circumstances. Like there are so many nuances to relationships. So I don't want you to get like hyper focused on the if they do it twice, but if someone shows you consistency in not respecting your boundaries, they don't deserve to be in your life. And I know it's hard to let go of people, but the freedom that you get from living a fulfilled life where you have your needs regularly met, if you are a boundaryless person, you have no idea what that feels like until you're at that point. So April, this is the end of our conversation. Do you have any final words before I start closing us out?
Yeah, just remember that boundaries are here for your safety. And if we think about it like that, it makes it so much easier to put them in place. It makes it so much easier to stand up for ourselves. Having healthy boundaries will contribute to a healthier mental state, physical, emotional, financial. I mean, the freedom that you get from saying no is unparalleled to anything else. It really is. And then lastly, if you're struggling, get help. Reach out to a life guide. There's a ton of great life guides out there. Reach out to them to get the support that you need.
We're so happy that all of you were here with us. I just dropped April's link in the chat again. If you're inspired by the wisdom that she has to share and you're like, actually, I really would love to be mentored and coached by this person in this area or other areas, you can see on her profile just her life experience, the ways that she can help you. She does more than relationships, but she's really good at relationships, then yeah, schedule a call. We're here for you. And also, we have our mentorship session next week, same time, where we're going to actually, we have a worksheet and we are all having an active conversation in where are the places that I don't respect my boundaries? Where do I need to put boundaries? Where have I been good at putting boundaries? So there's a lot. Um, but outside of that, I hope that this is a conversation that inspires you to start thinking differently about your relationships and just start feeling more empowered, because your boundaries are not meant to be this yeah, this toll bridge where people have to pay a toll to cross over. It can be a place where you can have more freedom and you can have more fulfillment in your life. So thank you all so much for being here. It is always a pleasure and a joy. You will receive the recording of this session on Friday. There's also a free resource that I dropped in the chat that will also be added into the email as well, specifically for setting boundaries. So as always, have the most beautiful week. We hope that this gets your mind turning and gets you starting to walk in a different direction in your life. There's a survey that pops up at the end of this. Please leave your feedback. If you leave any love letters for April, I'll be sure to email them over to her. And outside of that, have a beautiful week. Thanks, everyone. Bye.